We are absolutely thrilled that you are here. Thank you so much for your support. The exhibition, Virginia Jazz, the early years, has been a labor of love. It's taking us quite a few years to pull it together, but I think you will enjoy it. If you haven't had an opportunity to go through and read some of the bios and some of the information, please take the time to do so or come back. You will be absolutely thrilled to see the number of musicians, and this is just the surface, but the musicians from Virginia who have made extraordinary contributions to the development of jazz as an American art form. And so I am so proud to be a part. I am the curator of the exhibition. I am so happy to thank you so much. And I certainly would like to thank the Valentine Museum for giving us a home, a place to show what we have researched and the things that we've had in our archives, and it's just been incredible. It's not doing anybody any good in a box, right? Yeah. So we certainly want to thank Mr. Bill Martin, who's up there, and Valentine. Also, we thank our sponsors. There have been some incredible people who have helped make this possible, and we could, no way we could have done it without them. So I'll try to mention as many as I can. The Virginia Foundation for the Humanities. Dr. David Barringer is here. Don't see him now, but he is here. Oh, there he is back there. Thank you, Dr. Barringer. The Foundation for the Humanities held my hand through the whole process and made sure that we were able to have the support and the funding we needed to not only to have the exhibition installed, but also our lecture series. We had Dr. Larry Ridley last month, Ms. Ellington today. We will have in November Dr. John Edward Haas from Smithsonian, who will do a treatise on Ella Fitzgerald. So we're still celebrating Ella Fitzgerald's 100th birthday. And where is she from? Virginia. Virginia, exactly. I knew. Excellent. And then in March, Douglas Richards is the founder of the jazz department at VCU. And he is very, very good friends, or was very, very good friends with one of the leading jazz critics and authors, Martin Williams. And Martin Williams was born right here in Richmond, Virginia. Then in April the 22nd, I will host Family Day. And we will have members, descendants, and members of the families of some of the people who are in the exhibition. And there are actually some members here. Some, let's see, Glenroy Bailey in the back. Was it your great uncle? Yeah. Your Glenroy's great uncle is Roy Johnson, who was the leader of the Johnsons' Happy House. I'm not sure if Jean Walker is here, but her father-in-law was also a member of Johnson's Happy House. And you'll see that the picture of the Johnson's Happy House, that's our signature photo that we've been using. And that particular big band was from Richmond, Virginia, but they were well known from Canada to Florida. They were extraordinary. Everybody talked about this band and their rhythm and their harmonies, and it's just incredible. The picture that you see was a photograph taken in 1929 on the stage of the Savoy Ballroom. It had been a huge big band competition. And all of the big bands of the day were there, Count Basie, Buchanan, Hot Pickens, and all the others, including Mr. Duke Ellington. And our Richmond band won the competition on that day. So the photograph that you see is the winning photograph of Johnson's Happy House on the stage of the Savoy Ballroom in 1929. So that's our signature photograph. So there are still a lot of their family members here. They'll be coming in April as well. And I surely hope you will come back and let's salute them as well. So does it sound better down here? It's better? Okay. I also want to thank the Virginia Commission for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, Culture Works of Richmond, Dominion Energy, Bank of America, the Inclusive Edge, NBC 12, WCBE 88.9 FM, and the Richmond Free Press. So really do appreciate all of our sponsors. If I've left anyone out, but most incredibly all of you, the individual sponsors, individual contributors, and your supporters who come and enjoy what we have provided for our community. So I think we have the volumes now, and I think what we will do is have a conversation. So we'll start with a conversation, and then we'll have a chance to answer some questions. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please, a very warm Richmond welcome, Ms. Mercedes Ellington. We're sharing a mic.
Okay. Okay for sharing.
Okay for sharing. Good. Our parents taught us well.
Yes.
Well, one of the things that I wanted people to hear a little bit about first, maybe some of your experiences with some of the artists that are in the exhibition. I'll let you tell. Okay?
Let me see. Let me start with backwards, kind of. With Ruth Brown, I never had a really good chance to work with her, but I carried her words with me as like a mantra. The chair song, if I can't sell it, I'm going to sit down, because I'm certainly not going to give it away. I think that should be every woman's mantra. I think that it's worth remembering, and if you want to delve into the rest of the song, the lyrics are on Google. But she was really incredible. I remember being backstage at the Apollo. My grandmother, who raised me, my mother's mother raised me, and she used to take me to the Apollo when the Ellington band was playing there. And that was a whole big deal because they toured 52 weeks a year. They were rarely in New York, but when they were there, they played the Apollo, they played the Rainbow Room, and some of the little clubs down on 52nd Street, the little jazz clubs. But when we were in backstage at the Apollo was a bevy of activity, because at that time they used to do a show and a movie and a show and a movie and a show and a movie. And I was loving that whole situation because I was loving shows and I was loving movies. So they would just plop me down in the middle of the orchestra and the audience, and some of the orchestra members' wives would sit with me and we would just hang out, you know. And then they would also bring food for the kids, the orchestra members to have backstage to snack on in between shows. And I was loving that too. And because my grandmother, she used to cook basic things, you know, like fish heads and oxtails. It was like, she was from the West Indies, so she made do whatever, you know, we could do. And they would eat, you know, special things like fried chicken. And fried chicken to me was like, see, that's what I really, when I had dreams of what I wanted to drink or eat, or if I had something painful, I was getting a needle, they say, think of something that you like, and it was fried chicken. But we would be backstage, and like when Squeegee Weegee, which is the nickname for Louis Belson, who was married to Pearl Bailey, and he was in the band, and she would be backstage to see him, and we would all, you know, cavort and talk, and I would be around. And it wasn't, I mean, I didn't feel like they made any exception of their behavior or their language or anything because of me being there, but I just felt like I was part of a big family. And there was such a camaraderie between the guys and the wives, because they were traveling a lot, so this was the chance for them to be together and on a work basis, so the wives had a chance to see what the band members do in their atmosphere, in their own setting, and they, you know, got a chance to enjoy each other and have a great time. So it was like a big celebration, you know, like a big Christmas dinner or a big Thanksgiving dinner, except that there was not that much eating except for the fried chicken. And there was just, they would go sometimes, you know, out into the audience to hear the band, and sometimes they would just stay backstage. And Pearl Bailey used to be there, and she would make the rounds of people. We'd just have talk in the hallways, because the hallways of the, if you go it's pretty much the same deal when you go to the Apollo nowadays. It's set up, that hasn't changed really. And the narrow hallways and the stairway to each of the dressing rooms, but people used to circulate and go, I think the biggest dressing room might have been on the second floor, but I'm not sure. And so the biggest dressing room, everybody would stay in there. And it was like what they call the green room now. Yes. Well, there was no green room then. It was the purple or beige room. But everybody would gather and trade news and catch up with each other. And we were just talking, too, about when the band would travel, they went to various very exotic places in the world. Except I did a study of this. I don't know why, but the band never went to Cuba. I want to resolve that issue, but that's another time. But they would travel all over, and when they went to Japan, they would come back with cameras. I mean, lots of cameras. That was the thing to do. When you go to Japan, what do? You buy a camera. And they would give them gifts, and they would bring Christmas. So Christmas was any time the band was in town. So that's the gift-giving time, Christmas. And you just went there and then celebrated. And then after the show, the last show was over, as if the fried chicken wasn't enough. You go to 125th Street, there was a steakhouse, and I don't know whether it was Frank's Steakhouse or whatever, and we'd all sit down at this one big long table and have steak. And I don't know how everybody was able to eat it, you know, because they've been eating all day. But that was the time, and everybody passed around, and everybody tasted everybody's food, and you had a certain vegetable, and it was just, you know, a really great thing, and I cherished those times in my life because I was being raised as an only child, so I really didn't have anybody to talk with as far as, well, there were neighborhood kids, there were kids in Convent Avenue neighborhood, and but my grandmother was very strict with me. She hardly let me go out at all, and we were, I'm making terrible segues, but there's, on Convent Avenue, I went to a Catholic school called Our Lady of Lourdes, which was Our Lady of Lourdes school and grammar school and church. And there was a whole community built around that system where there were people from Cuba, people from Puerto Rico, people of color, Irish people, all in the same parish. And of course now, I don't know if you can find that, but all the separation is happening. But this was very normal at that time. We all took part in presentations of the school. There was always a big presentation on St. Patrick's Night. You know, there was a big celebration and a show. And that's what got me involved in tap dancing, actually. In the first place, I was doing Irish jigs and reels, which translates into tap dancing. So, but it was such a great community feeling. And I go back now every once in a while. It's that area is right down the street from, or right uptown, but down the hill from the CCNY campus, the City College campus. And the City College campus is still intact, although it's missing one factor that I used to be in love with, which is Lewison Stadium. And Lewison Stadium was an outdoor amphitheater where they had shows, they had people from Broadway, they had ballet, they had opera, everything. And sometimes we didn't have the wherewithal to get in, so I used to peek through the fences, you know, and take a look at some of the action that was happening. But it was a unique community, and like I said, especially in New York, you can't really find that situation anymore. I think the real estate business has kind of disrupted certain circumstances where people are feeling pressed to move one way or another, move out, move in, and next question.
Okay. How about Ella Fitzgerald? Were you ever in her presence as well?
Yeah, Ella was, she very often played with the band. She sang with the band, and that was one of my grandfather's, if not the famous, most cherished singer that he worked with. He explained her and to other people as being beyond category. because she was an instrument that there was no bounds to her way of singing, her range, her way of interpreting the song, and her expression and her communication with the audience and with the musicians. And this is like, you know, musicians are really, I don't know how many musicians are here. Musicians are very unique. I was going to say strange.
No, it's not. Tell it.
People.
Tell it.
When you talk on their level, you know, they can understand you when you're using certain terminology and so forth, and you look like you're going to understand them, and maybe not, but she was a musician as well as a vocalist and worked with the band seamlessly. And he really enjoyed working with her a great deal, and they took every opportunity not only to work together, but to record together and to hang out together. And once, I remember in between sessions, it was between a rehearsal and a show, that I came in from, I was living with my father at the time in St. Albans, and he was living in St. Albans across the street from Count Basie, we call him Uncle Bill. Everybody was uncle.
I love it.
And then, well, that was another story. But, okay, well, the word uncle was used very loosely, and a lot of people ended up calling my grandfather Uncle Edward, because I didn't know what to call these people. When I was growing up, I knew my grandmother, I called her Momsy, I called my grandfather, my mother's father, Pop, but I didn't know what to call my father, and I didn't know what to call my grandfather. And so I had a conversation with my father, and I said, I don't know what to call him. I'm not gonna, he doesn't look like he wants to be called Grandpa, which was like ageism or something. So he said, no, don't call him that. And I said, what should I call him? So he said, go and have a conversation with him, ask him what he wants to call him. So I had a conversation, I shored up the nerve, and I said, I would like to be able to call you something, but I don't know what to call you, and I know that Grandpop is not the issue. So he said, well, I'll think about it. I think, well, maybe you should call me Uncle Edward. Call me Uncle Edward. And then he said, and I'll call you Aunt Mercedes. That way everybody was confused. Who was who? But that worked for him, and it worked for me. So from that point on, and I called my father, I think I ended up calling him Dad. I don't know. But he ended up calling his father Pop, which annoyed him to no end. They were at each other's throats all the time. My grandfather wanted my father to dye his white hair black or brown or something so that he didn't look so old, to make him old. And my father was after my grandfather to cut off his little ponytail thing. It just annoyed him. They were just, bickering back and forth. And my father, of course, was in the trumpet section. And, well, trumpet players have a peculiar personality, which each of the orchestra members has a particular personality. Trumpet players are very, they're like lyric sopranos, especially first trumpet player, because the first trumpet player, the notes go, dogs can hear those notes. And then you go to the trombone section, they're very slippery. This is my father, don't blame this on me, because this is what my father told me. I didn't make this up. And trombone players are very slippery. Saxophone players, because the saxophone is the easiest instrument to play, unless they play another reed instrument, they're not very bright. Drummers are fine after their first nervous breakdown. And bass players are the salt of the earth. And he never said anything about the piano. Never said anything about the piano. But, okay. So,
did we talk about Ella Fitzgerald? Is that where we were going?
Well,
yeah. Okay. All right, good.
So she
yeah.
So she babysat me
That was it.
once. Yeah, she babysat me she used to stay at the Algonquin Hotel. And between rehearsals and performance, I went with her and to her rooms and everything. And we got along really well because she was crazy about children and she never had any. So and I felt very comfortable in her company. It wasn't as if there was some age range of trying to communicate with somebody, but She made me very comfortable, and I was just like another person, except that she was a fabulous singer and was an incredibly gifted, and it just like was so natural to her. It was like she came out of her mother's womb singing, and she just like breathing, and was breathing and walking and talking. She sang, you know, so.
You sure had the experience of having a playmate, Ella Fitzgerald. That's incredible. One of the other artists featured in the exhibition is Bill Bojangles Robinson, dancer. And I think a lot of people are very surprised to know that Bill Bojangles Robinson actually revolutionized tap dance. And by taking from what I understand, by taking the art form up on his toes, and he tapped tall and elegant, and he was always so sophisticated and just so well versed, and from what I understand, rhythmically as well. There's a story about he asked someone to put a metronome, start the metronome, and he said, you know, without any music, you start the metronome, keep it down behind the stage. He danced the entire song. He never missed a beat. He was just that rhythmic. And not far from here, Adams and Lee, there was a school there. And kids were going across the streets, a very busy intersection, and several children were hit by cars, and some of them were killed. So Bill Bojangles Robinson, as a philanthropist, he came back here, he tap danced down the street to raise money for the traffic light there. And the traffic light is still right there. And when we had our opening September, a woman came in, she was 93 years old, but her birthday was the next day, she would be 94. And she said, I was a student at that school. I remember when Bojangles Robinson tap danced and raised money for the traffic light. Some of the kids that were hit by cars were in her class. So that's an incredible story. But you, as a dancer, I was very surprised when we had a chance to talk last night. You taught me something else about Bill Bojangles Robinson, not only taking the art form up on his toes, but he had another technique. We all know the stair dance. That he tried to patent that dance, as a matter of fact, so he'd be paid if somebody tried to do it. But tell us about that, the technique that he did. I don't quite understand it as a dancer. Yes. You explained it to me.
Yeah. Bill Robinson was like a pioneer. Not only because if you try to dance up a staircase, you know you have to be on your toes. If you try to put your heel down, you know you're going to fall backwards. So he was an absolute expert at dancing on and making these sounds, and clear sounds every time he would advance and come down, backwards or forward. And he was also a pioneer as far as the tap shoe itself. Because if you don't know, and you know now, taps are made of metal. But his tap shoes were made of wood. So it was wood against the sole of the shoe, and he designed it so that it was the wood sound, so that already you could tell there's a different sound. So wood against wood is different than metal on wood, and so the sound that he produced was very, very unusual. As a matter of fact, many years later, I had a chance to work with Bob Fosse, and Bob Fosse was trying to recreate that shoe so that Capezios or some place like that, they could actually reproduce it, and have it as an option. But I think it got kind of, I don't know, got voted down or something. I haven't seen it since, but I've seen pictures and renderings of what the shoe looked like. And it was, so when you hear taps, you know how exacting that has to be. And it's I think it's much easier, much more facile to do it with metal than it is for wood, because the two consistencies are very different. And it's much more difficult. So you talk about, I mean, we talk about dancers versus athletes all the time, and football players and, you know, hockey players. And the agility and the strength, and the muscle strength of the legs and feet of a dancer, especially of a tap dancer of that caliber, is just as viable as these ball players. In this country, we don't have the attention in the arts and in the dance as much as in sports. So in other countries, though, they do celebrate the dance in a much more, with much more attention and much more information. And I think that one of the innovations that came of this shoe that Robinson designed was the importance of the heel drop, the dropping of the heel, because he stressed so much of the toes dancing up on the front part of the shoe. When he did do the show, it was almost like a bass player would do. So that heel drop represented a bass. And it was like, he had a whole orchestra in his feet. And he created this sound that, and was so consistent with it, that he didn't need the metronome. And it was an accomplishment that was appreciated and tried to be imitated by many other Hollywood tap dancers and so forth. But I think that the people who mainly represented and tried to maintain his standards were the copacetics. In later years, the copacetics, represented by Honey Coles and Charles Cookie Cook and all of those people, were all very like descendants from Bill Robinson. And some of them really worked together with him at some point or another, because the Apollo used to be the recipient of a lot of these people went through the Apollo stage in some form or another, whether it was competitions or whether it was staged presentations, but that was the commonality. And another thing which was representative of a community feeling on 125th Street around the Apollo, the Rennie, the Renaissance, which is now torn down, the Savoy, the Audubon Ballroom, all those ballrooms created a sense of showmanship that created not only the audience, but attracted the performers as well.
Well, I think that dance segment that we just did, let's segue. I'm hoping that many of you know that Mercedes is also a dance pioneer. In the 60s, and some of us in here remember the Jackie Gleason show. Yeah. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And the June Taylor dancers. I mean, they were precision dancers. I remember as a kid watching that show, and sometimes the camera would come from above and look down, and they were dancing in such precision that they would make almost kaleidoscope type formations, and I just knew I could do that. I just knew I could be a June Taylor dancer. However, Ms. Mercedes was the very first African American hired for the June Taylor dancers. No small feat. No small feat. And so if you would just take a few minutes to, if you would, talk to us a little bit about your experience. How long were you with the dancers?
My first year as a June Taylor dancer was the year Kennedy was assassinated. And that was the first year was in New York. And then after that, Gleason decided to move to Miami Beach, built the rehearsal studio on his golf course because he loved to play golf. And he remained there until the rest of, I don't know how many seasons we did, but I was gone because, you know, that was a job. Yeah. That was a good paying job. Yeah. And then from that job, you could get unemployment, or as my friend says, unemployment. And that was, you were set the whole year, you know, as a dancer, and you could actually be dancing. Because at that time, the TV seasons were much longer. And we would do a new dance every week. We danced with, when Liberace was on, we danced with toy pianos. When Wayne Newton was on, we danced with banjos. We danced with xylophones. We danced with 10-speed bikes, if you can imagine. A precision number, 16 girls, 10-speed bikes.
Can't imagine.
I recently had
dangerous.
Well, I recently had an opportunity to be with some Rockettes, and I started to talk to them because some of the new ones they don't know about the June Taylor dancers. So I said to them, you know, well, yeah, right. And their music is slower. Jackie Gleason wanted this music coming fast and fast so he could make his entrance and everybody would be like this and they'd applaud, you know, for him. So he gets the applause, our applause, on his entrance. That was very clever of him. Yes. And those kaleidoscope things was that was our rest period. We got to lie down on the floor.
The legs, and yeah, that's what I remember.
Yeah. We got to lie down on the floor and heave and then get up, and then that was getting into the second part of the dance, which usually there was a stop time section, and then there was an out section, and then there was the kick line. And after that, you just wanted to kill yourself, but you had to sit and smile because Gleason was coming out. I just had lunch with his Gleason's widow's son. His name is Craig Horwich. And his mother, Marilyn Gleason, married Gleason after a Romeo and Juliet kind of story of a romance that was thwarted in the beginning and then ended up everything happily ever after. But and Marilyn Gleason is June Taylor's sister. So that's how June Taylor and Marilyn Gleason was a June Taylor dancer in the beginning of the June Taylor Dancers. And so she was also on the show. At one point, I remember, it was a special occasion because after Gleason decided he was hemming and hawing about getting into a relationship or what they're going to marry, and Marilyn gave up. She said, I'm going to Chicago, which is where Marilyn and June were originally from. So she went back to Chicago, she met this lawyer, she married the lawyer, they had a son, and then her husband, the lawyer, died, and then she moved back to Miami Beach to be with June so that the family could be together. And when Gleason found out she was back, he divorced his wife that he had, and they got married. So this is how it happened.
Oh, tell them about the audition.
Yes. Okay, so all right, I digress. I went to the audition with doubts in my mind as to whether I was going to be able to get this job because a friend of mine called me up and like kind of dared me to go to the audition. I said, my tap is not that great. She said, come to my roof, it's August, and I'll show you the combination, I know the combination, and then you can have that under your belt. And that's when I learned, you know, tap dancing. Everybody in this audience can tap dance because it's only a matter of putting your weight on one foot or the other foot. So you can just time it right, and you can look like you're doing the step. So I went to the roof, and I learned the combination. The next day I go in there, and we're doing all kinds of things, not only tap, but ballet, modern, jazz, all this other kind. We're going through elimination, and the place was mobbed because everybody knew this was the best job for a dancer in town, even better than Broadway because television paid much more than Broadway. So we're there, and I'm looking around, I'm just in a sweat, and I've noticed at one point we were all lined up, and there were only 17 of us. And I said, well, I guess, you know, she's gonna make some more, I'll be probably eliminated in the next section. So I was getting ready to go, and then there was a flurry at the desk. The producer, Jack Philbin, came in, Gleason came in, they all put their heads together with June. And then June turned to us and she said, congratulations, you're the June Taylor dancer. So I said, I still think there's a mistake, you know. And there wasn't, because June came over to me and she took me and she said, now I know you've got a weakness, a certain weakness in tap. I suggest you take some tap lessons and I will fire you if you don't live up to the job. Because she was notorious for firing somebody every week if they didn't have their makeup right. And because when you go to rehearsals, she insisted at rehearsals that you have full makeup and no holes in your tights. In case Gleason walked in, she didn't want him to think that she had hired a bunch of dogs. So you have to always have hair and makeup and everything. And so I couldn't get dressed fast enough because my mom, who lived in Philadelphia at the time, I wanted to hurry up and call her and tell her. By the time I got to a phone, she already knew because it had been on the radio and it had been on television. And so I said, And I said, you don't have to worry for a while, Mom. I think I got a job. So it was really an amazing situation. And so the first year was in New York. Now Gleason decides to go to Florida. He creates a train called the Great Gleason Express, which left out of the old Penn Station in New York to go all the way down to Miami Beach. And I was one of the few June Taylor dancers who went and made that transition because many of the other people didn't want to go to be in Florida. So I'm on the train, we're chugging along, and on the side of the train is the Great Gleason Express, you know, so that was, everybody knew who we were. Steve Lawrence was in the car, he was singing, they had a Dixieland band, they had Jilly's catered the place, it was food, it was unbelievable. They made a pit stop, my geography is terrible, in Alabama, Georgia. There was one place on the way down. They made a pit stop for supplies and for photo opportunity. And I said, well, I'm not getting out of this train because I'm seeing strange fruit hanging from the trees. So I stayed in the back and in my, there wasn't a compartment in my seat. And they said, well, there are not that many June Taylor dancers, so you have to get out and go onto the platform. So I snuck out and I was hugging the back of the train towards an exit so that if anything happened, I could dash into the train. And I'm standing there and I have sunglasses and a big hat and everything. Somebody from the back of the crowd yells out, what's that colored girl doing there? Well, strange fruit hanging from the tree. So I'm getting ready to make my hasty retreat back into the car, and Gleason reached his arm out and grabbed me and pulled me into his armpit and he said, you stay right here. And from that point on, I think he kind of looked out for me, and it was really amazing because when a couple of years later, the next year I was looking to get an apartment on my own, and a friend of mine that I had made from the June Taylor dancers took me to this area, and I found a place that I liked, and we were talking to the landlady, and she was Philippine, and so she took my friends aside and she asked them, what was I? And they said that they said she's Hawaiian. So that was the only reason why. I'm saying, you know, I say, I guess I got the place, but do I have to get a skirt? And I mean, but it was like, you know, it's crazy. When you think back at things like that, you say, well, did that really happen? It's like unbelievable that those people would act that way or would really have the nerve, you know? I mean, because Gleason brought big business to Miami Beach, and he was a major contributor to not only the economy in Miami Beach, but the talent pool, everybody. And it was a big boom. They built the Gleason Auditorium, and it was a great marketing success. And in any case, as it turns out later, Gleason had made arrangements to write an opera with Ellington, and they never did, but they collaborated. I mean, Gleason was kind of a writer of music, and he wasn't a real musician who could write music, but he did compose, like, Melancholy Serenade, the theme song.
The theme song.
Yeah. And it was, I mean, people's paths crossed. So the musicians and people in the theater, that was a community that really thrived on communications with each other. And as long as you kept on moving, you would be able to live, you know. I know one point, my first job after I graduated from Juilliard was West Side Story in Australia for 7 months. And I grabbed my bag and I left. I said, that's the great choreography, #1, and I didn't even know where Australia was. But on my way back, after the show was over and I was coming back, I came back through Hawaii. My father was there with Della Reese, and he was the musical director for her show. And he said, he phoned me when I was in Australia and said, stop off in Hawaii, we'll spend some time together. So I did, and we had a great time, and Della took me and she brought me a moo-moo. And then when they left, Nancy Wilson came. And Nancy and I hung out together, and we were on the beach. And we were on the beach one day, and some woman comes up and asks her, said, why are you on the beach? You don't need a tan. And I'm saying, like, what? You know, somebody has a nerve to come up to somebody and say something like that. And, well, I didn't even know if they knew that this is Nancy Wilson, number one, but that somebody had the nerve to come up to somebody and say that, you know. It just leaves you, you know, breathless.
Or wanting to say some colorful language.
Hey.
Okay.
What it is.
Yes, yes, yes. So I heard you mention choreography. We're going to segue a little bit there. As a dance pioneer and choreographer as well. One of my favorite productions, I had an opportunity not to see it on Broadway, but a television version of Sophisticated Ladies. Do you know this production, Sophisticated Ladies? And Mercedes had a starring role and was also co-choreographer as well. So would you talk to us a little bit about that production? I mean, that was a lavish production, and I think Desiree would be great in the lead of Sophisticated Ladies. We could do that in Richmond. Yeah.
So Priscilla's part or Judith's part?
Or Judith's part. So would you tell us a little bit about Sophisticated Ladies?
Not Priscilla. Phyllis.
Phyllis Hyman. Phyllis Hyman.
There was an incredible cast because it was a combination of people from all walks. Phyllis from the cabaret world. There was Judith Jamison she had just retired from Alvin Ailey Company. Then there was Gregory Hines, who was from the tap world. Priscilla Baskerville from the opera world. People from P.J. Benjamin and Terry Klausner. Terry Klausner was the understudy for Evita on Broadway. So Terry Klausner and P.J. Benjamin were Broadway people. But the rest of the cast, we had 8 men, 8 ladies. Was it 8 or 4? 4 and 4. And so it was the brainchild of Manny Fox. Manny Fox is one of the Fox brothers. There's Charles Fox, and they're all in the business in some way. Bernard Fox, who's a sound designer. There's many Foxes. And he came to my father at one point, and my father was living on Broadway at 62nd Street, and he said, I have an idea to do a musical with Duke Ellington's music. And at first it was supposed to be conceived about a show about the orchestra and about the travels of the orchestra and what went on. And there was so much trouble with the book. John Gare was one of the writers, and it ended up with such a stew. The book was changed. When we were out of town, we went to like 2 or 3 cities out of town before we came into New York, and there was such turmoil. I remember one part was they were changing the pages so quickly that we were rehearsing one show in the day and doing another show at night. And they expected people like Gregory to do the show that they had rehearsed at night, and he said, I have to absorb it a little bit more and give me a little bit more time. And they said no, and they fired Gregory Hines. They fired Gregory Hines out. So we were scheduled, it was in Philadelphia, we were scheduled to do a show that night, and Phyllis and Terry cried so much that they lost their voices. They could not sing, they were just totally destroyed. So what we did as a cast, we refused to do the show.
All right.
So we went down to Penn Station, got Gregory, brought him back, and that was the only way that they continued to do the show, because we said we're not going to do it without him, So he brought, that's another sense of community, because each of these shows, when they run a long time, or if you've been through some terrible times together, you become a community bound by terrible times. And it was, I remember that the costume designer, Willa Kim, who I recently went to a memorial service for her, designed these costumes and they weren't ready for our first performance. So the wardrobe people were carrying them down in bags from New York to Philadelphia and pushing them onto us as we were coming off stage. We didn't even have a chance to try them on. Like, I remember in Caravan, we were all dressed as aviators in white aviation suits. My zipper was on the bias. And I mean, everything was wrong with it. But we just poured ourselves, we're walking kind of funny because the costumes, and we're like this. And so, but we were determined, and as the costumes came out of the box, we would go on stage. And it was like such an incredible thing. And then all of a sudden, one of the towns that we were supposed to go to, we skipped, because once the audience saw what we were doing, the theater in New York opened up and said, okay, we're available, you can come in. Because we were not supposed to come in, they were trying to look for a theater, they didn't know, and I don't know whether it had to do with the fact that this was not an entirely a show consisting entirely of people of color. It was a mixed show. So that, and this is what Ellington always advocated, not one or the other, a mixed bag. So his orchestra was a mixed bag, and the show consisted of a mixed bag of people. So that was, and the orchestra at that point with my father was also very, very mixed. And I don't know whether it was resentful of that, because everybody wanted to say, oh, this is an all-black musical, and that we weren't. So we were kind of, up in the air. And, but once it was accepted, won some Tony Awards, and Phyllis really came into her own with that show. And it reinvigorated a lot of people's careers. I know hardly anybody realized that Judith Jamison could sing, but she sang. And she was dancing with, I don't know how many pins in her hips. She had been dropped in one of the ALA dancers, and her partner dropped her and she broke her hip, and so it was put back together with pins. And so she was dancing around that, but I'm talking about, I got 3 pieces of titanium in me too. So,
sorry, they were. They were.
Yeah. But every Broadway show has its experience. I think nowadays, when you hear of a Broadway show getting on, behind that there had to be a lot of drama. Good, bad. Currently, Broadway is getting a little avant-garde, because they want to present some things that are more audience-friendly, so the audience is getting more involved. Like you see something like The Great Comet or the Hamilton. They give you a perspective of historical characters that might have never been highlighted before, or there's new information coming out. And from what I understand, there's now a show that's being presented in London of Duke Ellington, and they're talking about the same type of avant-garde presentation, where you have the audience being participating in the show in some way, and moving from place to place in the room, in the audience, in the theater. So I don't know.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens.
We'll see, right?
Yeah.
Would you like to have a sip?
Yes, I'll have a sip.
Okay. Well, now it's time that I think our audience should participate. So we have a few minutes. If you have some questions, now's the time. Yes. Like the mic?
If you like.
Yes, I would. Yes, I would.
Okay, I'm going to be a bit of a.
That's all right.
A bit of a. 2 questions. One, you mentioned Ruth. Well, we talked about you two talked about Ruth Brown, Pearl Bailey, Ella Fitzgerald, and then something about June Taylor bounced inside that. I had a conversation with Mercedes earlier. What's it like being a woman in that world? What does it take? Pearl Bailey had there are men who call her all sorts of things, and Ruth Brown said, I ain't gonna give it away. I mean, what is it to be a woman? You're a woman in this world. And then secondly, the second question is something you said that, Courtney, you said, keep moving. And I'm wondering where that, when you talk about, as a gig, I'm gonna pack my bag and go to Australia. I don't care where it is, working is working. That sounds like that philosophy came from somebody. And I wonder if it's either your grandfather, Duke Ellington, or your daddy, Mercer Ellington. So.
No, you got me, The keep moving thing, I use as a mantra because in my various joint replacement operations and things, I've worked past them, through them. I'm still working past them and through them. Now doing competitive ballroom dancing, and my subject is rhythm. So I do samba, rumba, cha-cha, paso doble, and jive. And you have to really keep moving. And it's just a way also of an outlook on your life that you have to keep moving. No matter what anybody tells you, you just go, you know. I had a vocal coach at one point, Helen Gallagher, who was with me when I did Note on the Net, and she said, don't let anybody ever tell you you can't do something. This is just general. Don't let anybody ever tell you you can't do something. Whatever you think you can do. And she said, talent is 50% facility and 50% desire. So when you think about, you know, being your own best fan, that's what you have to do. And anything, whether it's in show business or whether you're a welder or, you know, a construction worker, whatever you choose to do, that's what you do. What's the first question?
Women.
Women in the blues.
How tough does it have to be? Because you
Very
Taylor were fights on the minutes.
I mean, there's a certain aspect when you look at the jazz world, the jazz field. You all of these men dominate the field, and when a woman has to fit in, especially in the certain era, there was like a subset. It was always like they had to sneak in, you know, and they had to find their own reason for being there, and they had to give something that was not there before. And the feminine side of jazz is like a new seasoning in a stew. You know, you have this meal and you do, and all of a sudden it's got a new taste because there's a new ingredient. You know, and women are just have a viewpoint and a sensitivity and an innate knowledge that belongs in the field that isn't necessarily a man's first priority. You know, a man's first priority is concerned with the instrument that he's playing and the music that he's writing or performing and the notes on the page and whatever, being true to those kinds of things. But the female touch inserted in the midst of all of that gives this art form another flavor. June Taylor was immersed at that time in a man's world because she was a television choreographer, female television choreographer, and with no other, the Ed Sullivan Show and the other shows, the other variety shows that were around, they all had male choreographers. And she had to fight her way into her own sense of being assertive and she was like Army captain or so. We actually, because we were like soldiers. You know, being a precision dancer, the Rockettes, this is like soldiers. You're trained. I was talking with Marquette and said this is a terrible thing because that training has remained with me, and unfortunately, in New York, I'm choreographing Times Square. Now, I know you're not supposed to be choreographing Times Square, but when you try to walk one way and somebody's walking this way, you know you cannot walk on the bias. You can't get to walk this way or the other way. Straight lines, people. Don't swerve. Don't curve. You're interrupting the traffic, the flow, you know, one way and the other. So I get caught up in that a lot of times, unnecessarily, but I do that with dogs and small children as well.
To keep them in line. Keep them in step. Another question? In the back first, yes.
You say women
Yes.
So when I saw on the news that you were here, I had to come see you.
Oh,
And you just took me to a state of right, Route 11, which is such a
Oh.
training thing, I remember that.
yeah. Yeah. Great.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you for coming. Great.
Yeah.
Greta, question?
Yeah, sometimes when you have a famous parent, that's about it. Sometimes it's difficult to come out from under the shadow. What are the attributes that you think that you leverage to be able to become your own person? Thanks.
I was lucky because I didn't want to be a musician. So I didn't have to go under what my father went through, because my father did have that aspect. I mean, he had his own band at one point, and Ellington told him, my grandfather told him, quite frankly, that was good interest, and maybe that was a small part of his life, but he also told him that there could only be one Ellington band. So, me, my grandfather told me several things. He said, you should go, if you want to be a dancer, you need to go to Europe. Because he said that there were many more job opportunities in Europe for people of color than there were here. And that's why, and he pointed out Josephine Baker. Because Josephine Baker, she had a fabulous career. And he also said, home is where the work is.
Okay.
So.
Very good advice. We have time for one more question.
You were the first, you took the second, third. How long did someone else?
Okay, I couldn't hear the question. Say it
She
one more
was
time.
the first, who was the second, third, and following?
Oh, the June Taylor dancers? Oh, so you were the first, do you
Yeah.
know the second or the third?
No, they weren't.
There weren't any. That's a good question. That was a good question. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all for your attention. We're going to end it here. We'll have an opportunity if you go upstairs. Oh yeah, the book, Duke Ellington, an American composer and icon. This one's mine. I will cut your hand off if you touch it. But there are copies upstairs, and Mercedes has very graciously offered to autograph your books for you. So we'll be here a few more minutes, and if you'd like to at least meet her, show her some Southern hospitality and love, do that, please. Thank you again, and you know, we love you badly.
Yes.